Charlotte is the co-founder of Wellness Theory, an author, master coach who's been in the world of wellness since 2005. She specializes in inner transformation of mental health, emotional well-being, high performance, and self-mastery. Aside from her corporate success within the fitness and wellness industry, she's coached hundreds of high performers to eliminate unhealthy stress, be well, and live authentic, meaningful lives. And I know she's so excited to talk to you today. But first, I want you to take a moment, just reflect on these questions I want to ask you. How different would your life be if you could escape overwhelm and live fully? Do you give yourself a hard time for getting overwhelmed? Do you add even more pressure on yourself to do better and be better? If that resonates with you, just drop a little thumbs up in the chat box. Because if so, please take a huge sigh of relief and know that you're not alone. No one is immune to stress and overwhelm. It doesn't, everyone experiences it. It gets the best of everyone at times. But there is a way to escape it, and it doesn't affect your performance and well-being. Like most of our speakers, Charlotte's learned this the hard way, and you don't have to. Charlotte will be sharing a very raw and real account of what it really looks like to escape overwhelm so you can perform at the highest levels authentically. She knows firsthand how it feels to struggle with the internal conflict of constant overwhelm and juggling life's responsibilities to the point of hitting rock bottom and struggling to get back on track. Now, Charlotte will be the first to tell you how overwhelming it can be to rebuild and climb those mountains of peak performance. But she'll also be the first to tell you that there is a way forward. Her own journey is really proof of that you can bounce back and create the life you always wanted. So if you want to know exactly what to do when life throws twists and turns your way and perform at your best in all areas of your life, just listen in close as I hand you over to Charlotte. So show it. Oh, there she is.
Hello.
Hello.
How are we doing? Thanks for the intro, John. It's really weird you introducing me there. Beautiful. I can see some of your faces already. Amazing. Guys, so thank you again, just for every one of you that are here today, whether obviously you're watching this on the replay or whether you're here live. At the end of the day, like, you're really showing up for yourself, and no matter where you are on your journey, you clearly already have those raw ingredients of devotion and commitment to perform at your highest, right? So there's a reason you're here, and it's so inspiring to see that you guys are showing up for yourselves, like I said earlier. And it's actually a beautiful light that you're choosing to step into every single day. So first of all, I'm super grateful for you. Now, over the next 30 minutes, as Jonathan said, I'm going to be sharing what I've learned so far on how to escape overwhelm and perform at the highest levels authentically. All right. And I say authentically because I believe that there are some things that we do not get told about overwhelm, and we all need to hear them. And I also say authentically because, as everybody that's been here speaking over these last 2 days, is we're still learning, still expanding, still evolving. And I really wish the same for you, to forever be a student, right? Because the minute we think that we know it all, right, is the minute we close, isn't it? And isn't life better when we're open, when we're living in wonder and open to new possibilities? Give me a thumbs up or a little heart in the chat if you agree that, you know, being open is actually really that sweet spot, and if we can really start to master that, then perhaps that life of abundance just gets that little bit easier. And actually, guys, over the next 30 minutes, when something resonates with you, I really want you to pop a little heart in the chat, okay? And the reason why is so that you can really acknowledge for yourself your own authenticity consciously. Whenever something strikes a chord, I want you to notice it, right? So you can really drive yourself forwards in the way that you need to. All right. So there's a couple of hearts in the chat already. Throw some more hearts in there so I know you guys are with me. I'm loving seeing the hearts and the W's as well in there. I love that, those W's. All right. So guys, as you know, I, along with Jonathan, work with a lot of people in high pressure life situations, from CEOs, teachers, entrepreneurs, senior to middle managers, leaders of life, parents who are living under the weight of responsibility to provide for themselves and their loved ones, right? And we get to help these incredible people overcome their stresses at the deepest levels, psychologically, emotionally, and physically. And we help them to overcome that Achilles heel of overwhelm, which we all encounter at times. I want to share with you something which really stayed with me from a client that we worked with. I will never forget what he said to me. He was a client from Abu Dhabi, actually, a wonderful Emirati guy called Ali. And I met him for a catch up. It must have been about a year after he'd finished coaching with us at the Address Hotel in Dubai Marina for our Dubai family that he joining us today. And he shared with me, like, his relationship was improving with his wife. He was more present with his kids. He'd lost loads of weight. He'd started running again. And on top of that, he'd also been promoted. Right? It was a new leadership role at work. He'd become a major in the Abu Dhabi police force. And he was absolutely chuffed with himself, as obviously I'm sure you can imagine. But it was really interesting because then he sort of leaned into me and he said to me, do you know the most powerful thing I did with my wife and my new colleagues at work when I got the promotion that I learned from you? And at this point, I was on the edge of my seat, right? Because he didn't usually kind of say things like that in that way. So I was really, really curious. And he then said, I gave them space and permission to feel what I knew they were already feeling because I felt it silently for so long. That feeling of intense pressure and overwhelm and all the responsibilities. And then the most powerful part, he said, was I reassured them that even the best of the best are brought to their knees by overwhelm if it's not addressed. I couldn't believe it, he said to me. Some of them literally instantly looked younger with a sigh of relief, just knowing that they weren't alone and that, you know, other people feel like this too. They told him that they felt understood and seen for the first time in a long time. And of course, he then helped them to address it by sharing with them what I'm going to be sharing with you today. But the reason why I share that is because there's two things that I really, really loved about it. One is he said that he gave them space to feel what they're feeling. Just breathe that in for a moment. Space to feel what you're feeling. Most people don't really know what they're feeling because they don't take the time to pause and check in honestly with themselves. Or they bottle up their feelings and brush them under the carpet and just get on with it as best they can, which then actually just amplifies the overwhelm and makes it worse, doesn't it? And the second thing that he shared that I absolutely loved was the incredible truth that even the best of the best, the highest performers on the planet, experience overwhelm and pressure. But most of us don't usually believe it, do they? Like, we don't believe it. We see these high performers and think, no, they're untouchable. They've got it all figured out, right? It's just us that haven't figured it out or really understand what it is that they know that we don't, right? Or we perhaps sometimes blame that physical thing that we're experiencing, right? Or that physical problem that that's happening in our lives. But actually couldn't be further from the truth. Because yes, it's true that high performers know how to stay centered, right? And they can be the eye of a chaotic, overwhelming storm. But that doesn't mean they never get carried away in the storm, right? It simply means that they have the confidence to know that if they do get swept away, they have the ability and inner resources to come back to their center and get back on track quickly. They come back to that coherence that Scott was just speaking about, right? They know that we actually waste more time and energy in beating ourselves up and overthinking all the things that are going on. And our energy is obviously better spent accepting that overwhelm is actually a part of life, right? And our resistance to it is actually what then gets us stuck in overwhelm. It creates anxiety, pressure, self-sabotaging thought loops that keep us there. How many of you know what I mean? There we go. Got felt that in the chat from Chantel there. Amanda's got a high in there. Because guys, overwhelm is different for everyone, isn't it? For you, it might be a million and one things on your to-do list, right? It could be pressures of constantly trying to be enough for those around you. It could be the emotion that comes with trying to get where it is you want to be, even when it's really, really hard, but yet you're still trying to do it with that ease and enjoyment that we're all supposed to have, right? How many of you resonate with this on some level? Let me know in the chat. Share some of those hearts in there if this resonates. Tamara, I've got some nods as well going on the videos as well. Brilliant. So you're in the right place. Okay. So let me tell you why I'm speaking about this today and give you some context, because it's very easy to look from the outside and to see successes from creating powerful events like this and building an impactful business to serving hundreds of people every year, to living on the beach in Thailand and traveling back and forth to Dubai and the UK as we please and essentially loving life, right? It's easy to assume that all is well. but all we see isn't always the whole picture. Overwhelm has been the absolute theme of my life right from the get-go. I was brought up in a turbulent but uniquely loving house where there were always people coming and going. Domestic violence and emotional abuse was prevalent. And the overwhelm of it all was so paralyzing that actually at the age of 7, I stopped speaking pretty much altogether. I barely said a word to anyone. And by the age of 11, this was the first time I actually remember feeling really depressed and suicidal for the first time. I felt invisible, isolated, disconnected, completely alone. I was feeling powerless at the age of 11 years old, no zest for life whatsoever, right? And this wasn't anyone's fault, right? This was just the reality at the time for me, right? Those around me were doing the best that they could and loved me with all that they knew and all that they had. But here's the thing, right? By the age of about 12, my silence then turned to like a frenzied, courageous panic, which actually ended up being my new way of dealing with overwhelm at that time, right? I remember very vividly, literally like packing my dad's bags and throwing him out of the family home. Because literally the overwhelm of the abuse just hit its tipping point. And from that moment, at the age of 12, I took responsibility for pretty much everything, including putting food on the table, looking out for my brother and my mum, which meant growing up pretty fast and carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Throughout my teenage years, like it was tough. Like I felt like I was literally just like drowning in all of this like chaos. And self-imposed responsibility became another coping mechanism for overwhelm for me. This then led to pressure and essentially alcohol dependence. So I was drinking just enough for it to be socially acceptable and not quite enough to be deemed an alcoholic, right? It'd become a bit of a crutch for me to escape overwhelm throughout most of my 20s. And guys, even when I was an adult living life on my terms, right, free from the past, essentially, I still was drinking in most evenings and weekends to blow off daily pressures of kind of work and relationships. And I wasn't doing myself any favors at all, because I was actually then saying yes to pretty much everything, especially in a work context. I was literally burying myself in more and more responsibilities, which made me feel like I was thriving, right? I felt like I was thriving because I was doing so well at work. Clients were getting amazing results. I was promoted through the ranks in the commercial fitness company that I was working for at the time. They were literally creating new roles for me because of the insights and results that I was bringing to the table. And I don't say that to impress you. I say that to impress upon you that coping mechanisms can hide in plain sight. And sometimes the most positive things are actually covering up something way deeper. Overwhelm is not something to be ignored. So I got to the point where I was living in Abu Dhabi. I found a replacement for drinking alcohol by this point, and that was moving countries and traveling. That was my new vice for escaping overwhelm at this point. Guys, give me a heart in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. If you know there is something that you do to escape life. Yeah, you know what I mean, don't you? So maybe it's smoking, drinking, scrolling on social media, partying, isolating yourself, withdrawing altogether, working really, really hard, taking courses, attending events and workshops, whatever it is for you, right? I'm really curious to know. You've got some hearts in there, some thumbs up. Panic attacks, first holidays. Okay, Julia, thank you for sharing. I'll touch on that if we've got time for questions after as well. Yeah, Amanda, we know Overwhelm very well. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm gonna give you some tools today, right? I'm gonna give you some tools. So, guys, it's really important for you guys to really be recognizing this. I'm loving you guys being in that chat and being really active, but I really make a note, write it down. Like, what are those things? What are your coping mechanisms? Like, how is it showing up for you? So then you can actually look and see if it's serving you or not. So for me, literally one night in my apartment in Abu Dhabi, everything come to a head, and overwhelm definitely got the best of me, right? I remember coming home from a normal day at work, and I went straight into my room. I was living in like a shared apartment at the time. I remember I went in and I closed the door and I closed the curtains as well. And I literally dropped to my knees. I dropped to my knees on the floor and I literally wept for hours and hours. After a while, I kind of summoned the energy to move from the floor to the bed, and I curled up in like the fetal position and just put those covers right over me. And I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't have a clue. I was scared of all the thoughts that were whizzing around my head. I was overwhelmed by this impending doom and sadness that I felt deep in my core. And I was sobbing. I was literally sobbing. My hands were shaking. Naturally, I kind of rocked myself in an attempt to soothe myself, but that just left me feeling more numb, to be honest. And I remember looking in the mirror, my eyes were just red raw, and my head, my temples was just throbbing. All I wanted was a way out. I was desperate to stop feeling this overwhelm and this pain, and I needed relief. But my mind continued to spiral into a dark, dark place that I never wish for any of you. And out of nowhere, I remember pulling out a scarf. It was a long scarf, but it was white and blue. And I remember fixing it onto the top of the wardrobe, and I literally started to thread a noose at the bottom. At that point, I literally collapsed in tears again, and it was like those really ugly tears, those breathless tears that come with sheer defeat, and it really wasn't pretty. I stood up and I slowly began to tighten that scarf around my neck. And I'll never forget the feeling of the soft but taut texture of the scarf, like on my skin. And I remember the wet tears were streaming down my face, right? And there was this like darkness of the room, and it just felt like the room was closing in on me. And for me, this was it, right? This was my way out. And I went to take what I thought would be my last breath, and I inhaled this like surge of energy. I just inhaled like. And that energy just shook me. It shook me. Now, I don't know if this was the grace of God or the courageous 12-year-old in me that somehow knew how to take responsibility in chaos, but it shook me to my bones. I immediately stepped down and I pulled the scarf from around my neck and pulled it down from the wardrobe. And then I burst into a new version of tears that I'd never experienced before. It was this cocktail of shame, disappointment, relief, guilt, gratitude, fear, confusion. I powerlessly just let go into this flood of emotion. And eventually, hours later, I think it was the early hours of the morning, I came back to some semblance of myself with the clarity that I needed help, clearly. Now, for the first time in my life, I reached out and asked for help to a therapist via email, phoning somebody to try and explain what all that was about was far too scary for me at the time. So I sent this really shy email. Unfortunately, she responded, and I saw her the following day. And that was then a catalyst for a healthier future, in all the ways I can imagine now. And it's funny because, in hindsight, I feel it was obvious now, right? I should have seen it coming. I was so easily triggered. I felt defensive. I was experiencing kind of emotional outbursts and panic attacks. They're really strange times as well. I was withdrawing. I was anxious when I didn't used to be. I was replaying situations and conversations. I was taking things personally, sabotaging myself at every opportunity, eating emotionally, you name it. I was literally a psychologist, perfect case study, I think. But that's the thing, right? When we're in it, it's hard to see it, let alone then doing something about it. And the crazy part of all of this is that to the outside world, I seemed fine, right? I seemed absolutely fine. But hitting rock bottom for me was clearly the wake-up call that I needed, because now I get to be here in front of you today and spend my days really helping others so they never have to hit their rock bottom. And I truly believe that had I known then what I know now, I would never have gotten to that point. Had I have known how to deal with overwhelm, my emotions, my mind, my stress, had I known how to connect with myself consciously and authentically, I could have been living this life of abundance way sooner. Now, here's the thing, right? I can't teach you all of that in 30 minutes in this chat. But what I can do today is share with you what I know works based on personal and professional experience and from studying with the best teachers of our time. And I'm going to share with you a model that I created that will really just help you to overcome overwhelm and stand in your true essence so that you can thrive in what's important to you. Okay. And like I said, everyone experiences overwhelm in some way. So it might not feel as heavy as what I've just shared, but the reality is the more we brush over our overwhelm and our feelings, the heavier it gets. And eventually that can lead to burnout or worse. So guys, from what I've been reading in the chat over the last 2 days is the how do we do this stuff is really, really important for you. So you're clearly hungry to get the how. So I'm going to share that with you now. So give me a heart in the chat if you really want to find out how can we actually do this. And, you know, grab a pen because I'm going to share some really cool stuff with you. I'm just going to come over to the chat because I think we've got a question there. Do you think rock bottom is sometimes necessary? Yeah, I absolutely do. I do think it is necessary to some extent, but I also think it can be avoided with a sense of grace. And what I mean by that is if we get those signs earlier, we don't have to hit rock bottom so hard. We can see it, we can observe it. And that's going to actually be one of the things I'm going to speak to you about now is when we can observe it and step back from it, we get to really see what's happening with such clarity and consciously and coherently that we can experience the lessons we need to take from rock bottom without the suffering. Right? There is a quote, I can't remember who said it, but it's like pain is inevitable, but suffering isn't. And I think there's a real difference there. So get that pen. Amanda's asking how in the chat there as well. Loving those hearts, feeling that love. So I'm going to share with you 6 P's. Okay. And these 6 P's are going to help you to escape your overwhelm and perform at your highest levels authentically, as promised. So you can use these 6 P's proactively and reactively. So you can use them in moments of overwhelm, and you can use them consistently and reduce overwhelm significantly in the long term, and so that you can come back to your A game quickly. Okay. So the first P that we have here is perspective. To live in intentional, meaningful life and to really thrive as a high performer, or as a human being, one of the most critical skills to develop is our ability to take what we'll call a meta view. The view from above that broadens our perspective, because we can't see the picture when we're inside the frame, right? We have to get good at stepping out of our experience. It's like when we ask ourselves, will this matter 5 days from now or 5 years from now or 50 years from now? The reason this is so useful is because it creates perspective, doesn't it? And looking at the big picture actually then reduces the emotional charge that we feel, and it clears the fog of the mind so that we can actually move into resourcefulness quickly. So like Chantel asked there, it's like rock bottom. Yes, it could be necessary, but we can almost do it from a distance so that we can come back to that resourcefulness as soon as possible. So we don't have to suffer and stay there in that darkness for too long. Okay. Now, to help you do this in your goodie bag that you'll get at the end of today, I'm gifting you a really powerful guided meditation that's going to show you how to be your own wise witness so that you can zoom out into that bigger picture in stressful or overwhelming times. So you'll get that gift today. Now, that was the first P, perspective. Okay. Now, just let me know in the chat, actually, does that making sense to you? Right? How getting that big picture view and that meta view can help us to create distance so that we can become more resourceful. Let me know in the chat, drop a heart, drop a thumbs up, give me a nod on the camera so that we can move on to the next P, because I'm not moving on until you've got this. All right. Beautiful. Yes. Fantastic. Okay. So the second P is presence. Without presence of the moment, we end up being consumed by our overwhelm. Right? Our thoughts and emotions run off into the future of what we think life will or won't be like if we do or don't deal with the very things that we're overwhelmed about. Or our thoughts and emotions run back into the past, right? And we start to prove to ourselves that it's the situation that we're in is really, really hard because it was hard in the past, right? And that often leaves us like ruminating on what was, and in some cases worsens the current situation, because then we add layers of judgment to ourselves. And all of this then just amplifies the torment of the overwhelm, right? When I was in that rock bottom that I described to you earlier, right, I was all over the place. My emotions and thoughts and everything was just consuming me. I wasn't there. Like, I wasn't really in that present moment. This was all stuff from past or future that was coming at me, right? So presence brings us back to the here and now, so that we can just stop running away with the thoughts and emotions or the things that need to be done or experienced. Stress and overwhelm is literally a call to action. It's the call to step back into the flesh and bone of reality. Dropping into our body and coming back to our senses is the fastest way to come into presence. So if you find yourself in that space, just come back and recognize, what can you see? What can you feel? What can you hear right now? What can you touch? One of the beautiful things that Scott shared there is the coherency. Is you place your hand on your body, right? You can feel your own heartbeat. You can feel your belly rising and falling, right? Because we come back to our senses. That draws us back into that present moment. And you all just felt that. You all just experienced that. So when we're in the moment, truly, we see things through a resourceful lens. We see them for what they are. And it's Eckhart Tolle that says, most of our suffering comes from dwelling in the past or in the future. But what if we dwelled in the now? What if we just visited the past and the future as we needed it practically, right, to live life in this 3D world, right? Just some food for thought. So the third P is patience. Now, pausing when we're feeling overwhelmed to gain perspective and to become more present will likely throw up some resistance, right? It's not an easy ask, especially when we're in the throes of overwhelm, whether it be about family, work, finances, thoughts, feelings. The thing that we usually want to do is kind of just indulge in it in some way, right? The last thing we want to do is pause and slow down and be present. Naturally, we want to find the solutions and rush off with the overwhelm. And that's just a survival mechanism, right? And it's natural, right? It's a completely natural that you would have that. So the resistance is actually healthy for us, though, right? It's a sign that we're at our edges of our comfort zone and expansion is on the horizon. So it's our job at this point to lean into patience, right? Which is the third P, patience. An attitude of patience can bring relief into moments of overwhelm instantly. When patience is lacking, there's often a feeling of urgency and like nothing's happening fast enough. And this is where pausing and taking a breath of patience can help us shift back into presence and help us gain perspective, right? So patience helps us with the first two. It helps us to gain presence and perspective. And patience simply means having any number of troubling thoughts or emotions or situations and still managing to act in a way that serves how we most want to live. Being patient is actually an act of kindness and compassion towards ourselves, which is necessary to navigate overwhelm easily and effectively, right? Does that make sense in the chat? Let me know. Give me a heart, give me a thumbs up, give me a yes, give me a nod. Let me know. Beautiful. Okay, so the fourth P is pace. When we are feeling overwhelmed, things tend to be moving too fast, whether that be our to-do list, getting like even longer, whether it's a barrage of thoughts, ideas, emotions. The pressure literally starts to build up and we create overwhelm. So it's important that we find ways to turn down the pressure enough to have space to address the issues at hand. And we do this by pacing ourselves with our commitment, with our headspace, and most importantly, our energy. One of the biggest side effects of overwhelm that I see with clients is burnout. Has anyone here experienced burnout? Yeah, seeing some nods. Okay. Listen, I feel you, me too. It is rough. And burnout is that state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. And it often comes with a side order of reduced accomplishments and personal identity. And this can be avoided when we pace ourselves. So those of you that have bounced back from burnout know that managing your energy is fundamental for you to make sustainable change. So take a moment now and just be really honest with yourself right now about your energy levels. Are you moving too fast? And is your overwhelm moving you towards burnout? Or is your overwhelm actually making you slow down and paralyzing you? Both are signs that pace needs to be reviewed. And your pace, it can be checked on a regular basis simply by just asking yourself, are you living on empty, or are you living from a place that's fully charged? Are you as superhuman as you think, or are you on the verge of burnout? Even superhumans need to pace themselves, okay? So in the chat, they've got think so, slow down. Yeah, so ask yourself, what boundaries are needed? Or what do you need to practice to pace yourself? Which leads us into our 5th P, right? Practices. So here's the thing about overwhelm, right? It's likely not stemming from all of the spinning plates that you have in life, right? I'm going to burst that bubble. It's likely that the stress and the overwhelm is coming from a place that runs far deeper in how we're actually looking after ourselves. And all the P's that I've mentioned so far need our attention on a regular basis, and adopting practices that help us to gain the perspective, cultivate patience, and pace ourselves will actually make dealing with the overwhelm so much easier. Okay, and then you can be that person that stands strong in the chaos like we described at the beginning. Now, practices help us to discharge the pressure and help us to understand why we're getting overwhelmed in the first place. And the practices you choose will be unique to you, right? So you heard yesterday, Juan Reagan said, ask yourself what you need and then make that your practice for the day. Waleed shared how breath is so important. Sebastian spoke of those small daily habits. JP spoke about mindset and movement and meditation and stillness. And like Scott said, coherence. What a beautiful daily practice. For me, I love to journal, breathe, especially outside, move my body intuitively based on what I'm experiencing at the time. And I also really love to practice quantum flow, which I'm pretty sure Jonathan will tell you about shortly. It's just a really cool practice that I think everybody should actually try at least once. It's really powerful because it incorporates so many different techniques at once. So it's perfect if you're someone that doesn't have a lot of time and you're struggling to stick to practices. It's really quite powerful. And listen, I found that the most useful practices, right, are the ones that help us to uncover the thinking, the feeling, and the behavior in relation to the problem we're experiencing. So in this case, overwhelm. So any practice that allows us to dig into the root cause of the overwhelm is ideal. And practices keep us in alignment with our moral compass, our values, our beliefs, our emotional acumen, and our ability to let go of what no longer serves us. Right? They help us to identify the areas of ourselves that we need to heal. So ask yourself, what are the practices that you have? Or what practice do you feel like you need to perhaps start? So the 6th P, okay, is peers. And we're coming to a close now. So the 6th P is peers. Now, it's our nature to need support and connection in our lives, especially in challenging times. We need to have a community of people that we feel safe with, who are willing to listen to us from a place of non-judgment. We need a place where we can take our superhuman capes off and be real and raw with ourselves and with others. We need to be able to ask for help when we need it, whether that's to lighten the overwhelming load that we're carrying or to help us find perspective and clarity. Some of you might be fortunate to have this already. Some of you maybe not, but this is the time to prioritize it. As JP from yesterday says, is if you're doing it alone, then you're doing it wrong. And I am living proof of that. From where I was to where I am now has only been possible because I've surrounded myself with friends, teachers, mentors, and family members who are conducive to my life. My peers have obviously changed over time. It's only natural, people come and go, right? But what's important is that we feel like we have that support in overwhelming times as well as the good times. Every high performer knows that a solid environment of supportive peers is the difference between living a truly abundant life or not. So guys, those are the 6 P's: perspective, presence, patience, pace, practice, and peers. Now, honestly, if I don't use the 6 P's, I still get swept away in the chaos of overwhelm, even after all this time, right? But these days I come back on track far faster than I did in the past. Okay, far faster. The more we practice the 6 P's, the gap gets shorter between overwhelm and peace. We literally make a time collapse, and before we know it, we're performing at our highest levels. So escaping overwhelm authentically is about giving ourselves the grace of being who we are, knowing that we don't have to settle for overwhelm, but we don't have to settle for perfection either. Let go of the idea that one day you will arrive at this place where pain and overwhelm doesn't exist, right? Let go of that right now. Save you a lot of hassle. The goal is to journey peacefully, right, and joyfully into our own truth. It's not about trying to feel good all the time. It's about embracing that ride and navigating overwhelm and the challenges. And doing that with a deep sense of knowing that we're all human, right? We all face overwhelm at times. Give yourself the space to feel what you're feeling, and use the 6 P's and watch us and see just how fast you start to thrive.